Not yet.
Welcome to Baha'i Teachings Live. I'm Payam Zamani, and along with Jenna Nicholas, we'll be hosting tonight's program. As a Baha'i and a CEO, I've been myself grappling with many of the major challenges as a result of the current pandemic, but also realizing that there are major opportunities that this crisis is presenting to all of us and humanity as a whole. And as the saying goes, we should never let a good crisis go to waste. We thought it would be befitting to gather some of the experts and discuss some of these related topics together. Tonight, we have three major segments planned with a musical performance in between each. The first is a panel of experts who will explore the idea of global governance and economy from a Baha'i perspective. This will be followed with a panel of entrepreneurs and small business owners. And finally, a conversation with Steve Serwitz, the entrepreneur, philanthropist, and a filmmaker. At the end, we will leave you with a pre-recorded talk given by another entrepreneur, Melody Ehsani. So let me now welcome our panelists for the first segment of our program. You can all turn on your cameras. So I feel really honored to have you all with us tonight. In fact, I feel intimidated to have you all here tonight. I'm definitely not qualified to be asking you any questions, so I can only start conversations. Let me go around and quickly introduce each one of you, and maybe you can quickly wave. And Augusto, maybe you can just turn on your camera. There you are. So I'll start with Augusto, Dr. Augusto Lopez-Claros. He's the former director of the World Bank's Global Indicators. And Augusto, maybe you can wave so they can see who you are. There you are. And Dr. Nava Ashraf. She's a professor of economics at the London School of Economics. We have Shane Tejarati. Shane is the president and CEO of Global High Growth Regions at Honeywell. Dr. Robert Henderson, principal consultant at the Henderson Consulting Group. And Soveida Mani Ewing. She's the founding director of the Center for Peace and Global Governance. So I have a few questions that I have prepared, but also welcome the audience to share comments or questions that you would like us to ask. And as time permits, we will share some of those with the panel. So my first question, so as Baha'is, we believe in the concept of spiritual solutions to economic problems. How does that translate into action? How does economic solutions focused on prosperity for all look like? And maybe we can start with Soveida and we can go around.
Sure. So the first place to start is to ask the question, who are we? Who am I? As human beings, what is it that defines our self-worth? Is it the extent to which we can amass material goods, or is it something different? We propose that the answer to that question is two things. First of all, service, including work done in the spirit of service to humanity. And the second is the idea of developing virtues. When we realize that we're essentially spiritual beings having a physical experience as opposed to the other way around, we are invited to look more deeply. And a perfect image for me is that of the iceberg. What you see on the surface, our material lives, constitutes 10% of the iceberg. The 90% that's under the water, that really constitutes who we are, what conduces to our nobility as human beings or our abasement, all those key questions upon which we then base economic activities are the 90% under the water.
Thank you. Robert, do you want to take on? the same
Sure.
subject?
Perhaps I can just tell a brief story.
Please.
One of my clients was a very large multinational telecommunications company. And the project was to build a fiber optic cable from Penmarch, France, down the west coast of Africa to Cape Town. And so to do that, we built a consortium of 26 African, mostly African, and 2 European nations to begin to figure out how this thing was going to be built. Now, from the beginning, everybody was agreed that it was in the economic developmental best interests of Africa and its connectivity to the rest of the world to build this cable. But hardly any of the African nations could agree that their neighbor nation should be connected to the cable. So everybody knew, we're going to make money, we're going to prosper, we're going to do all these things, but I don't want the guy next door to have this cable. Now, so the first thing that we had to do was begin to cultivate this idea that the well-being of every nation was best protected by its unity and cooperation with the other nations.
Mm-hmm.
Now, having succeeded in doing that, the second thing we wanted to do was build a philanthropic broadband endowment to give away connectivity to schools, universities, hospitals, libraries, not-for-profits, and so on, because they would not be able to afford cable connectivity, but they would need to develop as a civil society. And the problem we had was that everybody thought that that was just a new way of stealing. And so the idea that children in remote villages should have the state curriculum and have pen pals in Japan, the advantages of that just eluded them. At the time, African universities had the same connectivity as one US household. So research and all that was out the window. So you can see that fostering this sense of our shared destiny, fostering the understandings and disciplines to work together, understanding that the poorest among us must develop along with the wealthiest among us.
Mm-hmm.
For all underlying spiritual challenges that face this engineering problem of building the cable. Now, in the end, the cable is in the ground, it's providing connectivity, there is a broadband endowment, and so on. But I'll tell you one more thing. One of the linchpins that got people together was their discovery that the best people in their countries were Baha'is. And when that came out as an issue, I asked them, well, why is that? And they said, well, because the Baha'is love and respect and work with everyone. They are concerned with the development of the poorest, the ones in the middle, and the richest. They are the first to come and the last to leave, and they don't discriminate against any participant. And that actually became part of the framework of the understanding that got the cable built and got this cable spread over 26 nations, and within those nations to remote villages and hospitals and schools and universities.
Thank you. Shane.
Thank you. I want to comment this probably from the perspective of globalization, maybe something that you were going to talk about later too. And I've lived in China for a better part of a quarter of a century, and like to look at it a little bit from a big history perspective. If you take the past, say, 300 years or so, it's basically been the Western world's oyster, the world after the steam engine and the Industrial Revolution. When China went to sleep, the rest of the world came out, and the discovery of the New World. We've basically had a world which has largely been around the prosperity of the Western world, North America and Western Europe, with institutions that have largely protected that prosperity. And so we've had the first world and kind of like the third world. In the past 30, maybe 40 years, the only challenge to that had been the rise of China. with a slightly different model. And China basically has been responsible for well over 72% of all of the poverty alleviation in the past 30 years. And equivalent of what happened in 300 years has happened in the past 30 years in the world.
Right.
It's the first time that we actually can have a real conversation about the oneness of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
It's the first time that it's even possible to talk about not having a lopsided world with institutions that only protect the 10%. Of course, within that, the 1%, within that, the 0.1%. Is the first time that we can talk about becoming free of slavery, of colonization, et cetera, et cetera. I think in some ways, and it's ironic that it's China and this discussion about COVID, because I actually was in Wuhan when the whole thing blew up in January. I've been living it, and behind me, every single country and others that are falling are places that I work every day. And so I think the fundamental spiritual principle of the oneness of humanity had not been really possible to come to the forefront of the discussion of humanity until such a day as we've had the past 300 years, and especially the past 30 years. And this coronavirus really has brought to fore that institutions we built, the fortresses around that used to be very important but are now fictitious, called countries, borders of countries only, are really inadequate for addressing global problems. The earth is doing very well. The rest of us are trying to figure out how to create a new world order, a new paradigm for it. So I think the teachings of the Baha'i faith fundamentally go at creating an order out of this pangs of anguish, that a new order that really fundamentally looks at the oneness of mankind and creating institutions that support that. Our current order, as Baha'u'llah says, is lamentably defective for that.
Thank you. And as we go to Nava, I just wanted to make sure that for those who've just joined us in the last few minutes, I will share the question again, that as Baha'is, we believe in the concept of spiritual solutions to economic problems. How does that translate into action? And how does economic solutions focus on prosperity for all look like? Nava.
So just building on what everyone said, I think this deepened understanding of interdependence, the principle of oneness, which is such a crucial principle in the Baha'i faith, such a foundational principle, the way that we can understand that and the interdependence of countries and individuals. I mean, the virus itself is spreading in this deeply interdependent way. And I think somehow that is creating a consciousness of the deep interdependence we have. And many of my colleagues, for example, are talking about it with respect to not shutting down global supply chains, because that's a major thing, a risk that could arise as a result of this, cutting off many, many developing countries. But really trying to keep ourselves open in the face of this, that requires a deep understanding of oneness of humanity and interdependence. But even going kind of deeper into kind of what we claim to assume about human nature, the field of economics is one where the underlying assumption has often been that people are driven by self-interest. And I think it's striking to see, even in a crisis like this one, how much people are reaching out for each other. And what it then looks like if we, instead of assuming that people are primarily driven by self-interest, that we understand that there is a core of each of us that desires to serve, that wants to give to others. How do we design institutions and incentives to create that? And I've seen that in many examples all over the world, where people become protagonists of their own development, and the projects and policies that come out of that are things that bring out the angels of our better nature.
Beautifully said. Augusto.
You know, I've spent the better part of my professional life working with international organizations. And one of the things that has been really quite eye-opening for me is to see how different countries have actually approached the whole question of prosperity and economic management. The very first part of your question dealt with the issue of how does one imbue the economic system, with more spiritual principles, and how that relates to prosperity. And as I look around the world, literally at all the member countries of let's say, the United Nations, you see a huge diversity of experience. You see countries that, for instance, have gone a long, long way towards providing safety nets for the population. Countries that have tax systems that actually attempt, at least, to collect enough revenue in a way that is equitable, so that revenue can then be directed to promote education, public health, infrastructure, and other very laudable aims. You see countries that have understood the importance of managing the public finances in a way that is responsible and sustainable. And of course, at the same time, you have countries that are far away from this idea, where corruption is rampant, where there is no capacity to implement good policies and so on. And so for me, the issue is not so much to sort of come up with a brand new economic system that we are going to build from scratch. The issue is rather more, how can we share good lessons? How can we share good practices? How can we have knowledge transfer from some of the countries that have had good experiences with development and with prosperity to other parts of the world? Let me give you a specific example of what I mean. This is actually based from my own personal experience at the World Bank over the last several years. At the bank, we built over the last decade a very, very interesting database tracking how countries are using the law to discriminate against women. It turns out that as you look at the world, there are countries that have laws that are fairly non-discriminatory, fairly transparent. They don't impose particular restrictions on women. But there are countries where women are second-class citizens, where a whole range of restrictions are imposed on women. This database has been a very powerful instrument to actually promote the elimination of gender discrimination in a large number of countries. For me, this is a very good example of how we can actually come up with practical projects, practical data sets and policies that can actually help us make substantial progress in a very important area, which is essentially how to empower women, how to make sure that they are able to make their contribution to human prosperity.
I just had a follow-up question, Augusto, that you talked about the safety net that some of the countries have provided as a result of the economic devastation that has happened. And of course, different countries have different levels of means, and different countries can, both when it comes to healthcare and safety net, countries are clearly not created equal. And it seems that, and I think you touched on this in one of your articles, that countries are addressing a global issue in a very much of a nationalistic way. And how do you think that can be done potentially differently? I mean, should we worry, as we deal with this pandemic, worry about the safety net more globally, or healthcare challenges globally? Because ultimately, we're as strong as our weakest link. So how do you think is the best way to address this globally, so this doesn't come back around either the same pandemic or a different issue come back and haunt us again?
Yeah, I think that there are two dimensions to this. Obviously, there is a role for the international community to come to the assistance of countries that have, very vulnerable health systems, that don't have the fiscal resources to implement these huge programs of government support, as you see in the European Union, as you see in the United States. Many of the countries in the developing world are much more constrained in terms of resources. And therefore, there is a role for organizations like the World Bank, like the IMF, to step up and to provide support in the short term, to supplement the resources that these countries have. But this is for the short term, right? This is to deal with the immediate needs of the next few months, and already quite a lot is being done in that area. Perhaps not enough, but the multilateral system has kicked in a fairly important way. But beyond this, there is a more fundamental issue, it seems to me, that needs to be confronted. And this has to be done at the level of individual countries. Let me give you an example, all right? Latin America, which is where I come from, has on the whole health systems that are not on the same level as Germany and Sweden and some of the high income countries. And yet in Latin America, we spend every year $64 billion propping up our military establishments, buying defense systems, and essentially, funding our military, right? $64 billion over an 8-year period is $500 billion, right? Now, $500 billion in the United States these days is not very much, right? But in the context of Latin America, it's a great deal of money, right? So for me, unless governments begin to think about the structure of spending and how they actually deploy the resources that they have, they are going to be confronting this crisis in a different form, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and so on. Let me give you another, perhaps even more compelling example than defense expenditure, because actually involves more resources. In the world at large, we're subsidizing energy consumption, gasoline, gas, electricity, carbon, to the tune of $5.5 trillion per year, right? That's 6.5% of global GNP, right? A good chunk of that is actually in my part of the world, in Latin America. Right? So you add that to what we spend on defense, and that gives you a sense of the scale of the resources which we're diverting, which could otherwise be spent to improve our health systems,
Sure.
to improve our educational system and our infrastructure, right? And that has nothing to do with external support or globalization or the role of the international community. These are decisions that we're taking at the national level. This is waste of resources for which we as countries are directly responsible,
Yes.
right? So it has to be both. There is a role for the international community. There is also a role for governments, not just in Latin America. This is a problem globally. It affects Africa, it affects South Asia, to a greater or lesser extent, it is very widespread.
Yes.
Incidentally, Payam, if I can just make one
Yes.
additional point, this whole question of defense spending and the military raises a more fundamental question, which links up directly with the whole question of global governance, right? Because the reason why governments everywhere, every single member of the 193 members of the United Nations feels that they have to have an army, a navy, an air force, and a military establishment is because we don't have a system of collective security. Right?
Yes, we're going to come back to that. You're absolutely right. I agree. By the way, just reminding everyone, the audience, that you can use the comment option for both on YouTube and Facebook and share with us your comments and your questions, and we'll share them with the panel as time permits. So let me share a quote. It's the first quote, Alex or Andre, if you're going to put it on the screen. This is from the guardian of the Baha'i faith, Shoghi Effendi, and he said this almost 100 years ago. He said, unification of the whole of mankind is a hallmark of the stage which human society is now approaching. Unity of family, of tribe, of city-state, and nation have been successively attempted and fully established. World unity is the goal towards which a harassed humanity is striving. Nation building has come to an end. The anarchy inherent in state sovereignty is moving towards a climax. A world growing to maturity must abandon this fetish, recognize the oneness and wholeness of human relationships, and establish once for all the machinery that can best incarnate this fundamental principle of its life. And the portion of this that, again, I'm going to repeat, nation building has come to an end. The anarchy inherent in state sovereignty is moving towards a climax. To me, this is truly profound. So to me, it seems like because of this collective experience, there is now a once in a lifetime opportunity to rise out of these ashes in solidarity with a common vision and conviction to establish a more noble, loving, and compassionate reality as it relates to economic decisions and how the world is governed. I guess, how do you think humanity can really take advantage of this opportunity and not waste it? What is your advice? If there are policymakers in the world are watching and listening, what is your advice? What is the path that should be taken to bring the world closer to a type of governance that could allow us to worry about the concept of prosperity for all? Maybe we can start with you, Nava.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think there are many other people on this panel that are better suited in expertise in that area. I think I will defer, actually, because I think others have experience in governance.
Fair enough. We'll go to Shane.
Well, I think, again, I go back to the concept that if anything, this coronavirus, more than anything, it has demonstrated that whether you're a global multinational, whether you are a sovereign state, whether you're a state within a bigger state, you are unable to actually deal with this problem on your own, isolated from the rest of the world. There has not been any nation that has been unaffected. We are a nation within a nation. We're a company operating over 110 countries, 130,000 people. I operate in about 74 of those countries. And it's incredible how we're still thinking, country after country come to us, say, well, can you put an N95 mask plant in my country so I can be independent? I have about a dozen of those right here on my board. Can you put a PPE thing, because we're one of the world's largest PPE companies in the world. We're going to country after country trying to get permissions to open up places, and every one of our processes we have to repeat in multiple different languages. Just before this meeting, I was on with speaking to one country leader, and I'll be speaking to another soon after, to allow us to open up things so that we can provide. We have proven that our existing borders and our existing systems, our existing institutions, even at the business, international global business level, it has been exhausted, is incapable of dealing with a global, truly global problems like this. Mm-hmm. We knew it inherently about the environment, but because the speed the environment was going was so glacial, at least for majority of the people, for those scientists we're not, we could ignore it and get away with it. We cannot get away with it here. You quoted Shoghi Effendi. I love to think what he also talked about was, he said, we stand on the threshold of an age whose convulsions proclaim alike the death pangs of the old order and the birth pangs of a new. He talked about this dual process of the falling of the old, but the creation and the birth of a new, which I think is a great source of hope for Baha'is, because we don't believe the world is crumbling away. We believe that there is a death pang of the old, which is now really acknowledged as not being able to address the needs of humanity. On the global governance level, which is not my area of expertise, but I have to deal with it all the time, we need to rethink our institutions. Our institutions basically fortify the last stage of humanity's development, which you read in Shoghi Effendi's, which is nation building. Nation building is over, but our institutions are like that. In order to be able to run one company in Asia, we have to have 750 legal entities, because we want to pretend to be one company, but we can't. So those are, I think, some of the fundamental questions, both at the economic level, at the business level, but also at the global governance level.
Maybe I will actually just jump in for a second.
Go for it now. Sure.
I mean, I think while this is absolutely true, and I think there is this great frustration that there's a vacuum of governance that does not reflect the reality of what's happening on the ground. At the same time, there's this strong contraction back towards nationalism and towards tribalism.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to acknowledge that and to really name it and recognize the desires among so many people to localize further as a protection.
Absolutely.
And in a way that actually is creating anarchy, but it needs to be understood as a deep human need that is not being met.
May I jump in and say something?
Yeah, please.
About that? So one of the interesting perspectives that the Baha'i writings afford us is that these times were essentially anticipated. And the Shoghi Effendi, who's one of the authorized interpreter of the Baha'i writings, for those who don't know, told us decades ago that when this time came, its purpose would be severalfold. One of the key purposes is to bring about to stir the conscience of the world, and I think we're starting to see that, to bring about the disillusionment of the masses of people. I think we're starting to see that with the pandemic and the global recession, which would result in radically changing our very conception of society and getting us to the point where we understand our fundamental oneness. We understand that our interconnectedness has made us a single organism. When you become a single organism, it becomes prone to systemic risk. And while all our global governance and national structures have been set up to deal with risks at the national level, we do not have the global governance structure to deal with systemic risk of the entire body of nations at the global supranational level, not just at the multilateral international level. Those days are gone too. Multilateralism is a term I think that will soon be gone from our lexicon. It will be supranationalism. So this and the other purpose that the Baha'i writings speak about is that this adversity that we're going through will instill in our leaders the sense of responsibility that they need to meet the needs of this age. You know, earlier, one of the panelists said we don't necessarily have to create new institutions. Well, here's a different way of looking at it. We need to, first of all, identify a set of global ethics, and a lot of people have started talking about that now. Identify a set of ethics, shared values, achieve consensus upon them, start applying them methodically, but more importantly, when we start building this new system of global governance, weaving in these principles, these global ethics into the very structures of the institutions. This is one of the things that is lacking right now. The principles of oneness of peoples and nations, the principle of equity and justice, the principle of collective security, these are all fundamental principles, are not baked into the structures, whether at the national level or international level, which is why you have all these disparate approaches even to attending to the welfare of a people of a nation. Some people have a better tax system, some people have a worse. But if we had a global governance structure that actually worked, for instance, one of the features would be applying a global taxation to all individuals. We would then have an enormous fund to help us in times like this, dealing with pandemics, helping with people who are out of jobs, helping with bailouts and so on. So there's really a lot there to unpack.
No, absolutely. You know,
Payam, can I ask a couple of things?
Yeah, if you could take 30 seconds, because I've got two questions that I want to follow up with, but go for it, Augusto, 30 seconds.
You know, Shoghi Effendi, I think in 1931 said that something to the effect that the cause of the world's unrest was a reflection of the failure of our economic and political institutions to adapt to the change of a rapidly evolving age. And I think that that is the problem that we're facing, that the current global order that we have is something that came out of 1945, the end of World War II. Against the background of that calamity, we created the United Nations and its system of supporting organizations. But that has been frozen in time. We are in the year 2020 commemorating the 75th anniversary of the UN Charter. The UN Charter has remained essentially unchanged, but the world has evolved and changed in dramatic ways during that period. And I think that is the challenge that we face now. Shoghi Effendi also said that the crises that are coming our way also have a kind of an educational dimension to them. That I think that they're intended to awaken the consciousness of our sort of interdependence. And they are, I think, going to do that. The global financial crisis of 10 years ago already did that in many ways in the economic sphere. And I think that this coronavirus is heightening this sense of our vulnerability, how brittle our current system is. And my hope is that we won't need another half a dozen of those over the next 10 years to finally, get us to do something about it.
I think we're all with you that hopefully that won't be the case. Robert, I have a question for you. So the term globalization represents something not so appealing to so many. How would you define the Baha'i perspective regarding this subject?
Well, it starts with the foundational principle that we are all one human family, that we are all the children of the same God, and that all of our religions emanate from that God as spiritual and social education chapters in the development of humanity over the expanse of history. But all of the religions and the Baha'i faith, the teachings of the Baha'i faith, talked about a time of the end, a time when all of the promises of the religions would be fulfilled. And the essential foundation of the Baha'i faith is to say that this is that time where we begin to recognize that we are all members of one family, when we build a global civilization, where we begin to assume collective and global responsibility for all aspects of our challenges. Now, as has been noted by a number of our panelists, these crises prompt us to pay attention, not just to how the Dow index is doing and how our personal fortunes are faring that day, but to the interconnectedness of the entirety of humanity. So I would just offer one example of that. Taiwan was one of the first countries to see the beginning indicators of the global pandemic. They asked for permission to go to Wuhan and to look at 6 cases that they thought suggested that a pandemic was on the way. They did that. They came back. They concluded definitively that a pandemic was coming. And they made preparations. They started testing processes, a digital app that would allow contact tracing, quarantine measures. They took a war footing with the population, and they did one other thing. They let all the other nations know. So very early on, everybody knew from the CDC in Taiwan that they had concluded that a pandemic was approaching. And this was in 2019. The problem was that the systemic disconnectedness of the nations had them more focused on their own national interests than on the collective well-being of humanity. And as a result, Taiwan acted quickly. Other nations suffered as a result of inaction. Today, Taiwan has about 400 COVID-19 cases and has suffered less than 10 deaths. And yet the World Health Organization had predicted that they would have over 500,000 by now and suffering tens of thousands of deaths because of their proximity to China. But because they were competent and compassionate, because they were able to inspire a unity of action and trust, they were able to protect their country. If we were able to spread that to the interrelationship of all the nations, just imagine how different our current situation would be.
That's right.
Can I say something for about 30 seconds on this?
Sure, go for it. Sure.
I think, building on what Robert says, Robert talked about the fundamental principle, the first principle of globalization. Unfortunately, in the world, the other narrative of globalization, this global companies, multinationals going global, do not operate on that first principle.
Mm-hmm.
The foundation of that is not based on the world of humanity being one, and therefore let's create governance and processes and institutions for the prosperity of all. It's about, largely has been a west to east or west to rest movement of prosperity for whoever was holding the keys 30, 40 years ago, which was really the Western world. And that is the problem. We're globalizing with a different fundamental perspective, and what we're getting is not really, is getting all of the tensions that this version of globalization is giving us. But I think going back to fundamental principles of what is true globalization from a Baha'i perspective would actually get us to different answers.
Payam, could I make a 15-second interjection?
Yes, go for it.
Just a compliment. I'm actually very optimistic about what's happening, because if you go back to 1965, 80-some% of the world's population lived in poverty. Now it's something like 9%. Infant mortality rate has plummeted. Education rate has risen to an average of 9th grade. There are so many transformational changes that have occurred in the global population that it's easy for us to get carried away by all the negative and destructive indicators and overlook the fact that the world has been transformed right underneath our noses, and that the condition and capacity of the world to take action on our current and future challenges is fundamentally different than it has ever been.
Thank you. So we're 4 minutes over, but we're going to go 6 more minutes over. I'm just going to present one quick question. Nava, I think you're well qualified to answer this one. This is from the audience. So the question is, this is from Meshkin Fassini. How do we address the idea of profit motive in capitalist business? How do we address endeavors that are spiritually meaningful, but financially maybe not so?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that there's such a extraordinary explosion of fantastic creativity around this area, precisely around this area. So a real rethinking of what the purpose of the company is. And when Milton Friedman talked about how basically the purpose of the company is maximize shareholder value, and people had interpreted that as the purpose of a company is profit maximization. But if those shareholders care about a number of things, not just profits, but also environmental impact and also economic justice, for example, these things, then actually the fiduciary duty to maximize shareholder value would be to create a company that actually provides much needed services, certainly, and at the cost of profit. So there is a really rethinking of not only these hybrid organizations, which you're going to be talking about later on with social enterprises, for example, that have dual motives, where they have a profit motive and they also want to have a very explicit motive for doing some social impact, but also just like standard companies who are really rethinking what is the purpose of a firm. And so I think if we think also about long-term versus short-term, so what we have seen are companies that are being driven by very short-term profit maximization. You look at a company like Unilever, for example, that has had a long-term vision and has been able to provide a lot of much needed services at sometimes the cost of short-term value, but
that's right,
providing extraordinary long-term value. I think there can be short-term trade-offs, and those should be made and encouraged by shareholders and by employees and by customers. But I'm one of those. This is probably my optimism shows, where I think in the long run, actually, finding out how you can make your best contribution to society turns out it can be actually in the end could be something profitable as well.
You know, at One Planet, one of the things that we do is that we invest in companies and in entrepreneurs. And one of the expectations we have from entrepreneurs is that build a business that takes into account the spiritual principles that are essential, not just essential because they're just part of who we are, what our essence is, but because it's also good for business.
Right.
And at the end of the day, every business, even if it's a business that is not a social impact business, should have a social impact agenda.
Exactly.
So as a result, we can all participate in making the world a better place through our everyday work and business and profession.
And I think this takes us right back to the very beginning of the panel when we were talking about all having this orientation of service and all work being service. People really see that. And I think even now in the crisis where we actually ask our question, what is essential work? You know, who are the essential workers in our environment? Really seeing those and being able to see all of that work as service, then every company has that desire to contribute and serve.
It is living a coherent life. You know, it doesn't matter what you're doing. So I'm going to give you each 30 seconds because they will kick me off. Literally 30 seconds. So I will time you. And the question I have for you, and if you guys could bring up my second quote, well, not my second quote, but the second quote. This is from the Universal House of Justice, a supreme governing body of the Baha'i faith. With prevailing modes of thought found to be badly wanting, the world is in desperate need of a shared ethic, a short framework for addressing the crises that gather like storm clouds. So the question I have for you, and please only 30 seconds, are economic and political changes that we are seeing today leading us towards a global government? And do we need a global government? And Soveida, maybe you can go first.
Yes, the changes are leading us to global governance because the systems around us are crashing. Essentially, we're coming to the understanding that just as there are laws that govern the physical universe, like the law of gravity, there are certain social laws that govern our social existence. And the key law that we have ignored at our peril for many decades now is the principle of the oneness of humanity. It's no big surprise then that we now find ourselves in the midst of these crises with all our social, economic, political institutions crumbling around us. You can't build an airplane ignoring the law of gravity. The project won't work. And we're not going to be able to tackle these global challenges if we don't build an institution of global governance that reflects and has baked into it the principle of the oneness of nations and humanity.
Thank you. Augusto, 30 seconds.
In the promise of world peace in 1985, the House of Justice referred to our stubborn clinging to all patterns of behavior and mental frameworks. I think that's one of the challenges that we face. On the one hand, the current system has very few defenders, right? Nobody's making the case that, you know what, we can just muddle through for the next 50 years, right? Nobody's making that case anymore. But we are still stuck in the past. And unfortunately, although I agree with Robert that we have had some very good trends in the last few decades in terms of social and economic indicators, and we're better off today than we were in 1945 in many ways, we are also much more vulnerable. We're more fragile. The crisis, these last two crises, the coronavirus on the one hand and the global financial crisis of 10 years ago could not have happened in 1945 because we did not then have the degree of connectivity and interdependence and instant communication and travel and so on that we have today. So I'm afraid if you ask me that our near-term future is actually quite dark. I think that our long-term future is bright, incredibly bright, but I think that we are going to be in for a very bumpy ride before we finally get it into our heads that we need to rethink our system of global institutions.
Robert, 30 seconds, please.
Well, to Augusto's point, the Baha'i writings refer to this period of human history as the turbulent adolescence of the development of humanity. And all of us who have raised kids know that adolescence is a very turbulent and difficult time, but it ultimately gives way to the maturity of adulthood. I would just suggest that after World War I, we had the birth of the League of Nations. After World War II, we had the birth of the United Nations. In the meantime, we had organizations in regions of the confederations of nations, like the EU and like the African Union and so on. And all of these are building blocks in a process. Now, as Augusto said maybe 20 minutes ago, we need an updating of that. And to your question, I think that these crises stimulate the refocus of our attention, of global attention, on the essentials necessary to improve the well-being, the safety and security of all the nations. And so Godspeed to all of us, that this crisis won't be wasted, but that it will be transformed into a stimulant for the intimate working relationship of nations for the well-being of humankind.
Thank you. Shane.
I can do it in 30 seconds, I hope. I think just building on what has already been said, I think on the one hand, it is no question that the consciousness on the part of the body of humanity has suddenly gotten to significantly lifted. On the other hand, and the conversations that's happening around that, around world order, new governance and all that, I have seen a tremendous resurgence of conversations around that from leaders of thought, from enlightened leaders, and even from ordinary people who were not thinking about these things before. On the other hand, I also see tremendous resistance, both on the part of nations to still cling to that, as I mentioned, dozens and dozens of requests to continue that fort, and tremendous resistance on the part of global multinational companies to keep that. So I think the challenge is, now that this consciousness has risen, for us to step up and not let out and not let down this conversation on building a new world.
Nava.
I think the move to global governance is there, but it will not be a foundation that will be sustainable if it is based on, for lack of a better word, elites or experts. So actually, into the principle, to complement the principle of oneness in the Baha'i faith, I would like to bring this other principle that I think is very, very important on individual investigation of truth, and the sort of protection of the rights of the individual to be a generator of knowledge, to be a protagonist of their own destiny. And I guess that's where I see the forces that are leading us to separateness, to tribalism, to nationalism, are partly because there is a way of life that people feel that they're not acknowledged in some way. And I think the protection of diversity, even as we move towards oneness, even as we move towards globalization, the protection of diversity and the rights of the individual are also, and autonomy are really important here for us to understand, so that we can make a world order that is truly based on the ground up, rather than kind of top down.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all of you. And by the way, I meant no disrespect by having my cap on. It's a really bad court haircut that caused me to do this. So this is what happens when you don't have access to a good barber these days. So, and my self-esteem is not
quarantined, Payam.
And my self-esteem is not very good given all everything I had to hear from my daughters and my wife. So I'm going to keep my hat on for now, for the next few months till my hair grows back. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you all in person soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Next, we have a dear friend, Lacan, who will be sharing a song with us. And after Lacan, we'll have Jenna Nicholas, who is the CEO of Impact Experience, and she will be coming on and she will host our next panel. Thank you.
Hello. I will also keep my hat on in solidarity with Payam. Today, just thinking about the times that we're living in, I just wanted to share a prayer that was said by Baha'u'llah, who is the founder of the Baha'i faith. And so here we go. Thy name is my healing. Oh my God. And remembrance of thee is my remedy. Nearness to thee is my hope, and love for thee is my companion. Thy mercy to me is my healing and my succor in both this world and the world to come. Thy name is my healing. Oh my God. And remembrance of thee is my remedy. Nearness to thee is my hope, and love for thee is my companion. Thy mercy to me is my healing and my succor in both this world and the world to come. Thou verily art the all-bountiful, the all-knowing, the whole wide. Thou verily art the all-bountiful, the all-knowing, the whole wise, 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 the all-knowing, the all-wise.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That was so beautiful. I'm Jenna Nicholas. I'm the CEO of Impact Experience, and it's such a pleasure to be with all of you today. Our upcoming panel, I would love to welcome to turn on your videos. We'll be discussing today challenges and opportunities being an entrepreneur and small business owner during the COVID-19 crisis. And we have a fantastic group of panelists that we'll be engaging with, and a great segue from our previous conversation. So starting off, we have Desiree Akavan, who's the co-founder of Laziz Bakery. Can you wave for us? Wonderful. And we also have with us Ali Javid, co-founder of Rapbook. Yeah, hi, welcome, Ali. Bahia Overton, who's the founder of Bahia Honey. Hi. Marianne Fique, who's a restaurateur and CEO of Via Capital Partners. Cyrus Greenall, who's the co-founder and director of Spectrum App. Welcome. And so we're such a pleasure to be with you all today, and diving into really how, just checking in on how you're sort of feeling right now as business owners operating in the world. There's a passage from the Baha'i writings that we'll pull up. It's passage number 1 in the sheet. And it says, "Be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age you live in, and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements." So as you think about that, and you think about the state of the world that we're living in right now, and as business owners, how are you doing? How are you feeling given everything that's going on right now? And we'll have a chance just briefly for everyone to talk. Maybe we'll start off with Desiree.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone who's tuning in. I hope you're all staying safe and healthy. Thanks, Jenna, for that introduction and sharing that quote. You know, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about, there are a couple of things. One is just this opportunity that we now have in social isolation to withdraw a little bit and look internally, and take this opportunity as entrepreneurs to reflect on the values that really underpin our business, and look at, you know, whether or not our mission still resonates, and how do we take this time to think about transforming not only ourselves, but our business and its opportunity to then transform society, right? So business, generally speaking, can be a key vehicle to the transformation of our communities. And so thinking about the needs in society right now, there's a lot of chaos, need for hope. Being grounded in gratitude, I think, is something that has been really helpful during this time, because it helps us kind of over and get a clearer headspace so that we can take that step back and really see, okay, what are the changes that we can make so that we're making decisions that are inspired by hope rather than rooted in fear.
It's brilliant. Thank you, Desiree. Ali, do you want to go next?
Sure. I think just with the current environment, everyone has been with their family or inside, and they've been on the phone with their family. And when you think about society, it all starts with your family. And I think organizations came about to assist one's family in having a living. It's a really tough time, I think, for everyone in different ways. And I think it's also a time where organizations can be there for employees, for customers. And I think that's really resonating worldwide, which is a really powerful thing. Whenever there's crisis, there's always opportunity. And I think the opportunity here is unity. So I think everyone's been trying their best.
Thank you, Ali. Bahia?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, making sure. You know, it's interesting because I've been thinking a lot about empathy, and that I always say that empathy creates the best inventions. When you are caring about someone, you're concerned about bettering someone's life, you create things that I think are sustainable over time. And so it's been interesting because I started my company based on having some empathy for my daughter and my infant's itchy skin, right? That's how I started this whole process. My empathy for her, and she, you know, her eczema wasn't nearly as bad as most of the people who buy my stuff, but thinking about the way that you can use your words and your creativity to be like a balm, literally, not skin balm, but like a balm to the suffering of people in your community, is constantly what I'm thinking about when it comes to what I can do during this crisis. So it's not just in your business, but it's in your life, and using my understanding of the purpose of life from a Baha'i perspective, to know and love God and to carry forth an ever-advancing civilization it's rooted in empathy. So that's where I am with it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bahia. Marianne?
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Well, as the owner of a restaurant and 3 coffee shops in our small town, Hoboken, New Jersey, right outside the epicenter of New York City, we have used the time similar to several, Desiree, to retreat a little bit and use this time to consult and reflect and like a retreat and think of really our motives and why what we're doing. And it's given us good time to think of coffee as a service and come up with engaging our customers and our community at whole. We have been holding virtual events, throughout this, like yoga classes and keeping the community together. And their understand, we did close down the 3 coffee shops out of concern for the health of our customers and our business. We're a high traffic area, even though we're considered an essential business, we could have stayed open, but we were very concerned about the safety of everybody. So we did close the coffee shops, whereas we thought that was a social responsible thing to do. And, whereas the restaurant was a little bit different. It's a small restaurant and we were able to shift more easily into doing deliveries and to go and not have a crowd of people coming in. Coffee shops attract a lot of people and we tried to do pickups, but the lines are too long and there was just too. So we did close for it. We've been closed, I guess, about 3 weeks but I think the most important thing is that we're living and breathing this green initiative with workshops and collaborating with other businesses. We host lots of pop-up shops in our coffee shop. And I think that's the way we're really supporting the community. We also deliver coffee to the hospital 7 nights a week. And we have been able to take food over to the frontliners as well from our restaurant.
Amazing. Thank you, Marianne, for sharing. Cyrus, do you want to go next?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. And it's so nice to hear everyone else's story. To share a bit about our background. So we work with healthcare organizations, and we're a mobile app that physicians and pharmacists use at the point of care. And so we work with organizations like New York City Department of Health and the World Health Organization. And our background has been in antibiotic resistance, which was the global health crisis before COVID. And going back to that quote, I think we've tried to make that part of our DNA as a startup, which is how do we help? And thinking, I think, primarily about how do we be of support to others, to all of these hospitals and healthcare organizations, and second, if they value that service, that they'll work with us. And so in one of our meetings with the New York City Department of Health a couple months ago, they were sharing some of their fears about COVID. This is prior to having any cases there. And so we as a company, we're completely focused on this other public health issue. And so we kind of changed and switched all of our resources over to COVID and see how we could help and how we could assist them and all these healthcare providers. So I think we feel lucky to be able to help. And I think this vision, I think that's been inspired by some of the writings that you shared, has, I think, put us in a position where we're able to, move quickly and really have a kind of services first vision.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cyrus. In the previous panel, Robert shared a passage from the Baha'i writings that talks about us kind of emerging from a stage of adolescence into adulthood. And it very much feels like right now that there's this opportunity as we sort of come out of the crisis that we're in to really be constructing and building a new world order and contributing towards that. How do you all think about that and sort of embedding spiritual principles into your work and into the broader discourse and work in society right now? And would love to ask Desiree to answer that first, please.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I think, that's a big question. But to boil it down, I think the main thing right now that we're thinking about as a business in terms of setting up for the future when we emerge from COVID-19 is the relationships that we're building and maintaining with our customers and the community. So what is playing as a small business in our community? how do we maintain these strong connections that we've really built throughout the last 2 years with our customers when we don't get to see them anymore? So having to really build up our social media platform, that's something we haven't had the time to do in the last 2 years because we've been busy baking and delivering and doing all the admin. So using platforms like social media in order to stay connected, to stay engaged, also to inspire our community members, right? So we've started implementing Waste Not Wednesdays, which allows us to give tips and, you know, inspire our friends and followers to think about how they're reusing the grocery store. So how can they think creatively and innovatively in their home, and really just trying to support our customers in that way, but also continue developing trusting relationships, because, you know, thinking to the old world order, these relationships, the trust has really been eroded by corruption and greed. Trust and moderation.
Oh, that's fantastic. And Ali, how does this play out in your work and life?
As a company, we process payroll for people working. So we've been seeing not many people are working through our platform. And I think it's been really painful to see that happen. And at the same time, you know, touching base with a lot of people. Some people have been affected and others have been safe at home. I think the thing that what's on people's mind right now is if this is the new normal. I think something really severe just happened and no one would have, or a lot of people would not have thought that this would have happened this year. And I think it's really hard to adjust to what the next 6 to 12 months might look like. Because this isn't all of a sudden going away. And I think the repercussions have only just started in different parts of the economy, different parts of people's family lives. So I think a lot of the people in the industry I'm in have really been trying to think about how to work together to support a livelihood while living within like a pandemic where you shouldn't be within 6 feet of each other. So a lot of open questions and I don't know, challenges.
Thank you. Thank you. Andre and Alex, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the third quotation that I have there, and this is from the Universal House of Justice in the Baha'i writings, and it says, "The stresses emerging out of the long-term process of transition from a divided world to a united one are being felt within international relations as much as in the deepening fractures that affect societies large and small." And one of the things that we're seeing very much right now is, and we know this from research, that when fear increases, that bias also increases, and that many of the communities and businesses that are the most affected, and it's hard to access capital, are those in the communities that have been historically marginalized and are communities of color. And I'm curious, as you each think about this in your work and in the interactions that you have with people, how you think about that and how you think about mechanisms for trying to address that gap. And would love to ask Bahia that first, please.
Well, it's interesting because I'm a business owner, but I also I'm a program director for a program that supports Black children and families. And so it's kind of been a dual process, right? Bahia Honey, it's beauty and well-being, right? And so part of what I've had to up in this past couple of weeks is the well-being part of that and how I'm engaging community around this. You know, it's really been difficult because as a social justice kind of focused person, trying to have empathy and compassion for all communities when my community in particular is being so devastatingly impacted by COVID-19 and the lack of empathy that I see for my community with that happening has been a very challenge for me it's been challenging for me to feel that connection, that unity, right? because you can't have unity without justice fundamentally, right? Abdul Baha, the master in the center of the covenant of Baha'u'llah, really said that that the purpose of unity is the purpose of justice is the appearance of unity among men. And so the idea of us moving away from that division and towards a unified kind of state requires justice. And when I'm thinking about certain governors right now opening up specifically places where barbershops and beauty salons and nail shops where largely people of color frequent or work, and also looking at targeting with poor white families, right? Also, and we're going to soft opening. Then it puts people in a crisis. If I don't want to come to work, am I now not eligible for emergency relief funding? Because now I can work, right? And so I'm putting myself more at risk. And also with racism and being a pre-existing condition, so any of us who've experienced racism, you're already going to be depleted. Your health is depleted, your mental health is depleted. You're not going to have the same kind of resistance to anything coming your way. So I feel like it's just been disparity with a little COVID sprinkled on it. And so what I've been trying to do in just the way that I'm engaging with folks is, one, acknowledging the historical trauma that has happened to our communities, and also empowering the community to say that you do have a locus of control to use your mind and your creativity to create some safety and some security even within this time. So with all of my work, I'm trying to kind of uplift people, but also recognize that we see that the truth of what is happening is unjust.
Thank you, Bahia. And Cyrus, how do you think about this in your work and life right now?
So, we see in our world of healthcare technology, there is often so much competition, so much about kind of hoarding ideas and products and services and so on. And we have again tried to look at, okay, how can we think about working together across boundaries? Historically, healthcare organizations, for example, often work independently of each other. They're not sharing ideas. And to be honest, they're so overwhelmed with their own clinical work that it's difficult for them to even have the space, the forum, to get together to share, how they're tackling COVID, for example. What type of infection control practices are they following, and what are the proper therapeutics, and so on. And of course, all the conferences that were being held are all being canceled. So it's more important than ever that there's kind of universal participation, that there's collaboration across boundaries. So this is something that we have been, again, fortunate to be a part of, and empowering kind of different institutions to share the work that they're doing. So if you can imagine, these hospitals, they're developing pages, hundreds of pages of documents that they want their healthcare workers to follow. And this information is crucial at the point of care to make sure that you're following the right, protocols and decisions to make sure that you're, as a healthcare worker, your safety is protected, and your patients. So what we have been doing is, trying to connect organizations with each other. And we've seen what's amazing resources being shared literally across the globe, from coast to coast. And it's something that we had never seen before as a company. And it's amazing to see kind of in a completely different industry, this spirit of collaboration really being magnified.
That is amazing. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. A number of you have referenced and talked about shops closing down, restaurants. I'm curious, as you think about sort of the future, where we're seeing more and more reliance on larger technology companies, and as we sort of come out of this crisis, like, how do we think about the preservation of small businesses and what role will we play in the future, and how are you navigating that as you think about planning on this sort of day-to-day basis right now? And we'd love, Marianne, I know you have a lot of experience working in these areas, and how you're thinking about this right now.
Well, we are thinking that we're going to have to, as far as the coffee shops, do different phases of opening before we can completely open up like we were before. And I'm not sure if that will ever even happen, or at least for a while, you know, because we're like a community center, we're a hub of activities. That's where we support our community by having all these kind of different workshops, from French classes to open mic nights to high school coffee classes and Haitian film festivals and other film festivals as well. Boy Cafe means to drink coffee in Haitian Creole. It started out of a trip to Haiti I did shortly after the earthquake. But anyway, that's so it's so community. It's a community hub that. But at the first phase, we're going to start probably delivering coffee to, you know, subscribers of coffee. So on a daily basis. So we're going to probably, you know, we're working on different ideas to open up slowly and gradually. And as far as the restaurant, we have had to shift completely to doing deliveries and takeouts, where that was a very small part of our business before. Now it's sustaining our employees, most of them anyway. And yeah, so out of this tragedy comes transformation. And where I think there's a quote I really like in the Baha'i faith, which is, man's merit lieth in service and virtue, and not in the pageantry of wealth and riches. And I think, you know, service is our focus, and we want to serve the community the best way we can.
Thank you, Marianne. And would love for those of you who are joining us through Zoom or YouTube, please feel free to share any questions, reflections that you have, and we'll have a chance to engage with the panel around some of those questions. But Desiree, would love your thoughts around this question around sort of the future of small business and how you're thinking about that.
I have one thing to add.
Yes,
we purchased Desiree's love cakes, and our customers
wonderful.
are really missing them.
Yeah.
Marianne's restaurant and the coffee shops are our customers.
Yes.
So yeah, you know, I wish I had a crystal ball. It feels like, to be honest, right now, we're all kind of on a sinking ship. And in particular, the restaurant, the coffee industry, food and beverage. And we're trying to just plug the holes as best we can. You know, there's a lot of trying to navigate the small business relief programs. Servers have been down, people can't access applications, right? So there's a lot of frustration around that. Businesses are having to shift their business models. So for us, you know, one of the decisions we made relatively early on, because most of our retail partners closed their doors, and, you know, catering business was down because venues were closed, events weren't happening, was, okay, let's focus on home deliveries to directly to consumers. And, you know, we did that for a few weeks. It was going pretty well, but the health situation in New York was deteriorating so quickly that we ultimately just had to weigh, you know, the business needs against health and safety. And we decided to put a pause on all operations. So we're having to be really agile. Some businesses are shifting their models to be more kind of, like you mentioned, Jenna, tech focused and moving to online platforms. For us, you know, one of the things that we're thinking about is shipping. And, you know, we haven't had a shipping program in place. That's something that we're starting to consider as an option. Some cafes have turned into grocery stores. So they're completely changing their models. And that goes again with sort of the exigencies of the times. You know, what are the needs of your community, of your customer base? And, you know, it's actually been really devastating, to be honest, and heartbreaking to see the impact on our industry. So many people have lost their jobs. You know, so many of our customers who are coffee shops, they've laid off their staff, and they've had to reach out to the community, you know, starting GoFundMe pages saying, hey, can you please donate and help support our employees because they have families to feed. So it really is heartbreaking, but at the same time, you know, it is, and it is also really pushing collaboration. I'm part of the Women in Hospitality group, and, you know, everyone's having to rely on each other because even though the ship is sinking, we're all in the same boat, right? So everyone is really just doing whatever they can to stay afloat right now.
Thank you, Desiree. So Bahia and Cyrus had addressed some of this earlier, but we have a question from Liz in Los Angeles, and she says that US unemployment is rising fastest for women and people of color. How should entrepreneurs and business owners take race unity and gender equality into account when opening back up and building a new economy? So I'm curious, I'm sure many of you have thoughts on this. Ali, what are your thoughts around this question?
You know, I was just reflecting on Bahia's last comment on this affects minorities the most. And it's, you know, the virus doesn't discriminate, but as a society, we have let things benefit those who have the most amount of money. And it's really sad to see. And at the same time, while we can't choose how COVID affects us, we can definitely choose as individuals how we work with other people. And I think that's why everyone's kind of listening to a call like this, is because they empathize with what's happening in society today. And this will wreak absolutely the most havoc on those who have the least. Businesses, individuals, families, etc. And I think our attention and whatever we can do should go to help them. I think everyone has a different capacity and means to do so.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
And part of this, though, I think the virus does not discriminate, but we do. And because of that discrimination, it's an impact. You know, I was having a conversation with the Healthy Birth Initiative in Portland, Oregon, and having a conversation with them about the fact that African-American women who are educated and who have the ability to live in nice neighborhoods and take vacations and have typically worse birth outcomes and higher rates of maternal mortality than the poor women in small communities. And part of that is because many of us are the only ones. We are subjected to racism on a daily basis. And some people in communities, they may not have a lot, but they aren't subjected to that. Sometimes they're insulated by their community, so they don't have those experiences. And when I run a program now, I'm a Black woman who runs a program for primarily for Black people. 95% of my staff are African-American or African. And the level, even though I liked my last job, the level of stress I don't have coming in every day to have to package myself in a way that is digestible for anyone else. I can't tell you what that has done for my well-being and also my actual physical health. And so when I think about, you know, if we're all exposed to a virus in a space, who's more likely to be impacted by that virus has a lot to do with how you've been depleted by the society, right? So what I always say is, when people always say, well, you know, I want to help these communities of color, I want to go and I think as Baha'is, we love the unity idea. And sometimes we don't want to talk about the justice part of the idea because that's more work, but we love to want to come into our other communities and serve. How about you serve your community? You work within the folks that you are in closest proximity to you that maybe make comment off-color jokes or maybe hold some prejudices. And no one wants to deal with the family or the folks in your office, but those are the people that are impacting the folks like me. And so I think that part of our job as Baha'is and as people who are trying to support this global kind of collective unity moving forward, we have to pay attention to what's happening right in our spaces. You know, where can we push people's thinking or ask them to be more curious about how this might be impacting someone who's not in their situation, I think is really what we all can do. You know, that's uncomfortable, but you know, I would say that if you're a person of color, you live in discomfort in this country. So it's the most that, you know, least we can do is to start to pay attention to those experiences.
Thank you so much, Bahia. And on that note of justice, there's a passage, it's passage 5, Andrea and Alex, if you wouldn't mind pulling it up, and also from the Baha'i writings, and it says that the human world will adapt itself to a new social form. The justice of God will become manifest throughout human affairs, and human equality will be universally established. when we think about this sort of a lofty ideal that many of us are striving towards in our work and our lives, and when we think about capitalism, which is often considered to be somewhat heartless, how do we think about utilizing business to create and manifest this world that we're building, and integrating spiritual principles into the businesses that we're operating? So Cyrus, would love if you wouldn't mind kicking us off on that.
Yeah, no, it's such a great question, because I think in our work, it's so easy to get lost in kind of the status quo of, how do I get as big as I can? How do I grow my business? How do I survive? And it's so easy sometimes to kind of get lose sight of those kind of fundamental questions as a human being, and to feel coherent with my, I go to my junior youth group and I talk about, love, but how am I, integrating that to my business? And I constantly, just the other day, as we deal with, sometimes a lot of, challenging, conversations and conflict. And I always have to kind of take myself back a step and think, okay, why am I here? Why are all of us here, right? It's to emanate love, to serve others. And that I think is kind of the fundamental question, is how do we imbue those principles into our work? And I say it's very difficult. I find it a very challenging thing. I feel lucky that we're able to do something that feels helpful right now. But yeah, I think that's the kind of question I go to is, how do I emanate love in my work? How do I treat everyone that I work with love? And I think that fundamentally, that has to be done before you can kind of change our systems and so on.
Amazing, thank you. And we'll have a chance to hear just a brief response from everybody to this question, and then we'll be wrapping up and transitioning back to Lacan. So Marianne, your thoughts around this sort of integrating spirituality into business and the creation of a new world and just world moving forward?
Well, I guess everybody has a part to play in that, and with their business. But hopefully, out of all this, tragedy, this great tragedy, can be a great transformation. And the thought that the fact that the whole world is on lockdown right now, and there's so much suffering, and this is big and it's painful, and no one escaped. We're all going through this, but hopefully, we can learn a lesson and learn it quickly, that through this suffering, that something great could come. And hopefully it's the recognition of the oneness of humanity. That there's another quote in the Baha'i writings, that the plant most pruned by the gardeners is that one which, when the summer comes, will have the most beautiful blossoms and the most abundant fruit. And so hopefully this is going to bring us somewhere where we will live our lives and recognize that our lives and our businesses are intertwined and dependent on each other, and hopefully work together towards as one human family.
Brilliant.
And
Thank
of
you
course,
so much.
business is still doing the social gathering of people in that space one day when we can get that together. But anyway. Okay.
Thank you. It's a beautiful passage. Thank you. Bahia, your thoughts on the question?
I was actually thinking about talking to my children of, work done, the spirit of service is worship, and also thinking about, Baha'u'llah talks about, the founder of the Baha'i faith talks about earning your living by your calling, right? And so the idea of, I didn't go into, to school, graduate school, and do all this work in therapy and mental health to necessarily become a lotion mogul. It wasn't my goal. But the idea that when things arise and you have an opportunity, to bring healing and health to someone, you do that. And so I think part of what I've been thinking about with my business is how to integrate. I went into social work to help really Black and brown children feel better in their own skin, especially in places like Oregon, where it's like whitest city in the United States, right? How do you feel good in your own skin? And like literally my lotion makes people feel better in their own skin. So I feel like I'm trying to, find ways to integrate those things. Like, how do you feel good in yourself? How do you feel comfortable? How do you present yourself in a way that gives you confidence and lets you know that that this world is for you too? And I think that that's part of when I think about the faith and the principles and that essentially being a Baha'i is the core of my identity. Before I'm a Black person, before I'm a woman, being a Baha'i and encompassing those values and aspiring to perfect myself every day is a process that I think that if I'm putting that as my primary focus of my life, everything that I do is going to be influenced by that, right? That goal. And so finding more ways to integrate service and my natural innate qualities, acquired knowledge and personality into a way that promotes this, the light of Baha'u'llah out to other people. And I think that I can't go wrong. And I think that if we focus on those things as Baha'is and Baha'i business owners, if we find ways to align those principles with the work that we do, whatever it is, we'll be on the right track. And the influence will be, people will be influenced and inspired by that. But if we hide ourselves and we try to blend into the status quo and what everybody else does to be successful, which, you know, in this society means more and acquiring more and more, we're going to lose that spirit and we're not going to have the influence and we're not going to inspire. So, I mean, I think we can't go wrong if we stay on that path.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bahia. Desiree, your thoughts around integrating spirituality into business moving forward?
There are a few spiritual principles that are manifest in our mission as well as our plans for growth, assuming that we survive this, right? Our mission, you know, the business Selena and I started was built on a mission to build healthier communities. So we produce healthy baked goods. They're paleo, you know, free of refined sugars, gluten, dairy. And with that, we are attempting to cater to the well-being of humanity, quite literally, the well-being and happiness, right? So providing a product that enables people to stay healthy without having to compromise on taste. So that's, you know, one key principle, but then the other is promoting knowledge and understanding. There are a lot of Baha'i quotes on the importance of knowledge and understanding. And for us, one of the plans that we've always had is to promote education around nutrition, and in particular with vulnerable populations. And that leads me to the point about equity, another principle, which for us is really important, not only in that aspect of education, but also as we think about hiring. Right now, it's just me and my sister, so it's a really small team, but our plans for growth include hiring a staff. So in the back of our minds, it's always been, okay, well, we want to create economic opportunities for vulnerable populations, and how do we think about that moving forward and put that into play?
Amazing. Thank you, Desiree. And last but not least, and I'm going to ask you if you can do this in 20 seconds, so I believe in you, and we have a number of wonderful things to follow. Ali, your thoughts around integrating spirituality into business moving forward?
I'll be super short then. I think it all starts with love. I think it's a universal principle. I think it spans all religions. I think there's a time and need for right now for us to all show love and compassion to each other.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Ali. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. So much inspiration and food for thought for us as we kind of continue to navigate these times. We're now going to hear again from the amazing Lacan, who's going to share a song that he wrote during quarantine, and then we'll hand back to Payam, who will be interviewing Steve Sarowitz. So thank you again to all of you for being here and taking the time this evening, and over to Lacan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, hello. Yeah, so as Jenna said, thank you, Jenna, for that nice introduction. I wrote a song about the quarantine, and it's dedicated to healthcare workers, as my father is one, and also to all the people that feel trapped and hopeless in this time of struggle. So. So for the living, life will go on. Stuck in our homes, it's so hard to move on. But our lives will change. It does rearrange as nature does. But don't you lose heart. Don't you lose love. Don't you lose hope. Fiending for lost human connection. Feels like we're lost, looking for direction in this fog of uncertainty. Keep your eyes on the compass and be still. And don't you lose heart. Don't you lose love. Don't you lose hope. Don't you lose hope. We're asked for too little for us to complain. Just stay inside and we might maintain for a while. Keep yourself safe and find things to do throughout your day. And don't you lose heart. Don't you lose love. Don't you lose hope. Don't you lose heart. Don't you lose love. Don't you lose hope.
Lacan to perform in person. When you have the opportunity, please definitely go there and be there. He's phenomenal. And now we have our conversation with Steve, who's got this beautiful background behind him. And I'll ask you in just a moment what that is. So Steve is a wonderful friend and one of the kindest people you will ever meet. And if you're like me, you appreciate the fact that you're on screen with Steve and not next to him, because you will feel like a little person. Steve definitely has a presence. Many of you know Steve Serowitz as a producer of the Gate film. He's also a very successful entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and has a really interesting spiritual journey that he will share with us. Thank you, brother. It's so good to have you on this program.
Happy Rizwan.
Happy Rizwan, exactly. So what's behind you?
That is the Garden of Rizwan in Akko, Israel. So my heart is always in Akko. At least, you know, I'm here in Highland Park, Illinois, but my heart is in Akko.
That's wonderful. So I have so much to ask you, Steve, and but we have little time. So I'm going to see if we can get through it quickly so we can cover a lot of different things. The first thing first, can you tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey? When did you start, and how did it come about?
Well, I started a little payroll company in 1997 with 3 employees in a basement office. And we managed to stay in business our first year. That was our big accomplishment. And we had licensed a product. Most of the other people were licensing the product and they go out and sell the product, and I did that. But I actually also learned how to program at night. And so I would sell during the day and I program at night, and we programmed, at least I did. And eventually I rewrote pretty much the whole system, and eventually we wrote our own system. And so we wrote this entire system. We've got into web-based technology. And in 2007, I brought on a president who's now the CEO, and we've just steadily grown the company. It was a 17-year overnight success story, went public as Paylocity in 2014, and we have over 3,500 employees today. I have a few other businesses too. I have a global payroll company called Blue Marble Payroll, which is doing very well right now. It's almost 10 times the size it was 3 years ago. We have another budding success, actually also has grown quite a bit, called PayEscape in the UK. And then I'm proud, very proud to be partners with the wonderful Justin Baldoni, who you are also quite good friends with. And I also have a little company called Spring Green, which made the gate. And then on top of that, my wife and I do philanthropy, a lot of philanthropy.
So did you always know, like as an adult, that you were an entrepreneur, or how did that come about?
I was at University of Illinois, and I was a student there, and my roommate at the time asked me to go to an entrepreneurs club meeting. So I did, and there was a attractive blonde girl there, and who was the president of the club. I said, "Oh, she's the president? I think I'll stay in this club." And the next thing you know, I just took to it like a fish to water. I was a natural entrepreneur. It's interesting because I see the same traits in my son now. It's just, I always, whatever I wanted to do something, I just did it, and I did it 100 miles an hour, darn the torpedoes. And that's pretty much my personality. As we'll get in my story, you'll see that I pretty much, if I want to do something, I do it, and we'll walk through a brick wall. And I just have the natural personality of an entrepreneur. So I ended up having a great time. My first venture was a painting company. I had a partner, and our first client paid us to leave his house because I'd never painted before. So we were dripping all over his furniture. But by my second year of doing it, I was pretty good. But I apologize if my original clients are anywhere in the vicinity. And then I also did a food fair that was quite successful when I was in college, that had about 10 or 20,000 attendees. That was my first big venture that I did.
You know, I'm not sure if I ever told you that my first business was also a house painting business. Hopefully
you were better than me.
I don't know about that, but there's a lot you can learn from, painting people's homes. So by the way, as a reminder to the audience, you're welcome to ask questions and provide comments, and as time permits, I'll definitely bring those up. So let's talk about your spiritual journey. When did you first learn about the Baha'i faith?
I was in college, and I was raised Jewish, and I went to the Hillel, the Jewish center on campus, and this wonderful gentleman gave a presentation on the Baha'i faith, and he talked about progressive revelation. And I love the idea that God has sent messengers in every age to guide us. And instead of thinking this is a competition between Jesus and Muhammad and Moses, and the Jews are right and the Christians are wrong, or the Christians are right and the Muslims are wrong, he was saying that essentially all the religions were right, and they were chapters of the eternal faith of God. And I loved that idea. I just loved it, and I believed in it right away. And in just 29 short years, I became a Baha'i.
I remember you told me a story, so I'm just gonna remind you of this story so you can share this story. And that when you met your now wife, and you were talking about, well, as you have kids, what will you raise them at, since she's Catholic? So maybe you can tell that story.
Well, I was Jewish and she was Catholic. So naturally I said, when she asked, let's raise them Baha'i. Because I thought correctly, actually, that it encompassed.
And you were not a Baha'i at that point.
I was nowhere near a Baha'i at that point. I could probably spell the B or maybe the BA. And so when my wife said, no, a real religion, I had no defense. So I said, okay, Jewish then. So that was my second choice. So years later, we get married. Years after that, we have children. Meanwhile, I actually had a friend when I was in my mid-20s, before I got married, asked me to study the Christian faith. And so as I'm dating my wife, who's Christian, I was studying the Christian faith with my friend. He had asked me 3 times. I kept telling him, I'm Jewish, I don't want to do this. And finally, he was persistent, and we've become excellent friends. And we still study the Bible. 30 years later, we still study the Bible together. It wasn't until my mid-40s, actually, I run with my friend who studies the Bible, and I ran with another friend who's Baha'i, wonderful friend, who's now disabled and he can't run anymore, by the name of Tim Hendershot. And he and his wife asked me to study the Baha'i faith with them, and I started studying. And within a few years, I recognized Baha'u'llah as the messenger for today. So I ran home to my wife. I said, I'm a Baha'i now. And she says, no, you're not. You have to wait for the bar mitzvah. It's another 2.5 years. And as it may be, actually, I'm going to change my background. Because what happened is, within 6 months of that, my company went public. And I was invited by Bill Strickland, a wonderful friend of mine. We do centers together. And I called him up to do a center in Chicago. He does these centers in urban areas that do vocational training and arts for kids. And I said to Bill, I'd like to build this center in Chicago. He said, great. We started doing the center in Chicago. And about half a dozen conversations in, he says, I'm talking to these Jewish philanthropists in Miami about doing a center in Akko, Israel. And I about fall out of my chair. Here I am. I want to be a Baha'i. For those of you who don't know, Baha'i is the holiest place in the world is actually right behind me. Not literally, but in the image behind me, which is the shrine of Baha'u'llah, and that's in Akko, Israel. So I was praying to Akko, Israel every day. And here's a non-Baha'i from Pittsburgh who asked me to go to Akko with him to build the center. So of course I said yes. And I reminded him that he had been very good friends with a late Baha'i by the name of Dizzy Gillespie, who actually was very crucial in his career. And so we go to Akko, and on September 12th, 2014, I remember the date, I walked into this garden one person and I walked out a completely different person, had a complete spiritual awakening in one day. And I walked in as a businessman who liked the Baha'i faith, and I walked out as a Baha'i who was pretty indifferent to business, which drove my business partner and my wife completely crazy for months after that, because you literally couldn't have a conversation. You know me pretty well, and you know it's pretty much every conversation comes about to Baha'i, some sooner or later. But I was worse then. So luckily I calmed down by the time you met me.
So what made you to leave the Jewish faith?
So I never left the Jewish faith. It's one faith. There's the faith of God. One day it was called Judaism. One day it was called Christianity. Another day it was called Islam. Today it's called Baha'i. I just recognized that the faith has moved forward, and it's the same faith. We are Jews who recognize Baha'u'llah. We're Christians who recognize Baha'u'llah. We're Muslims who recognize Baha'u'llah. There's only one God, and all the messengers were sent by God. So nothing can be in conflict with a hand. My fingers can't be in conflict with each other. They're part of the same hand. There's a couple of common ideas about religion. One is it's my religion is right and yours is wrong. That's a fairly common one. And as we look at the different scriptures, we realize they have far more similarities than differences. So we're just picking on the little differences. There's another viewpoint, which is also fairly common, that it's kind of spokes in a wheel. And this religion is here, and just pick your spoke. But in reality, it's one. And so you really can't pick a spoke and say, this is right, but not that one. They're all right. And they're actually a continual flow. And so instead of thinking of the religions as spokes in a wheel, they're actually chapters in a book. And the chapter in the book has a current chapter at all times. And the current chapter at this time is the Baha'i faith. And so I recognize that, and I recognize Baha'u'llah. And actually, within 6 months of leaving this garden, I became a Baha'i. It was a year before the bar mitzvah. They let me slide. And I've been a very passionate, and I've been a passionate Baha'i ever since. And my friend actually told me today, one of my friends from high school told me he's going to declare as a Baha'i, which really made my day.
Oh, wow.
So,
that's awesome. So I remember going to a restaurant with you for dinner in Palo Alto. And you walked in, and before they sat us down, you talked about the Baha'i faith with the host. Then we sat down, you talked to the busboy, and then the waiter, and multiple waiters or waitresses who showed up at the table, you spoke about the Baha'i faith to all of them. Why is that you feel like you need to talk about the Baha'i faith to everybody?
Well, because the dishwasher didn't come out, that's why.
That's right.
That's why. You're asking me why I missed the dishwasher? So I try to do this with love and kindness, and I don't want to impose my faith on anybody. I tell everybody this, I'm not here to impose my faith, but I want to share this. I believe that the Baha'i faith is an incredible gift to humanity. And so if you have this incredible gift, of course, I'm blessed to be one of the wealthiest people in the world, really. I'm a billionaire now. and I want to share my fortune, which I do with people with my philanthropy. Please don't call me. We have all our causes, but we give away millions of dollars every year to beautiful causes, like, for example, Tahrir Justice Center, which you know about, and many other causes, helping orphans, helping refugees. We try to share the wealth. There's a spiritual wealth as well. And I absolutely, with all my heart, love the Baha'i writings. It's made me a better person. And I just talked to a new Baha'i today, or I'm sorry, 3 days ago, and she just said, first of all, she said, with the COVID crisis, these are her words, not mine, that it's like a protecting shield. And I feel exactly the same way, that this is a terrible thing that's really affecting all humanity. But what I've noticed among Baha'is in general is that we're weathering this crisis, weathering the storm, because we know there's hope. We've read the writings, and the writings give us hope. And I've always said that Baha'is have so much hope, more so on average than any other group of people I've ever seen. And it's so much more apparent during this crisis. So I want to share that happiness and joy. You also see a lot of joy among Baha'is, real joy. And Baha'is, for those of you who don't know, we don't drink alcohol. So, but I was at a party a few years ago with my company. My mother-in-law has worked for me for many years. She retired from one job and she went to work for me. And one of the employees, I was out on the dance floor doing my joyful dancing. Some people might have other words for it, but I was dancing what I thought was quite joyfully. And this other employee asked my mother-in-law, so what is he drinking? And they didn't understand. They literally couldn't understand that I wasn't drunk. I was just high on life. And that's kind of how I am. And so, yes, I might be silly, but I'm just happy. And in the midst of the COVID crisis, I'm very sad about what's happening for the world. I think it's a tragedy, and I want to do everything I can to help. And my family foundation has actually given away especially over $2 million to help nonprofits just in the last couple weeks to try and help them through this crisis. So I understand it's a very hard thing, and I really feel for all the human pain, but I also am thankful that we're starting to realize through this crisis for one human family. So I guess my answer to your question is, I want to share the wealth. Yeah. What good is wealth if you're going to hoard it? You want to share it. And so we have this tremendous spiritual wealth. And I apologize if anyone hasn't liked it, if I've shared the message with them, but I'm trying to help. I'm trying to help make your life better. And several people I've taught have declared, and they've been very thankful.
So I know you are a very transparent person, easy to speak with. So I'm going to ask you a difficult question. Before that, I'm going to share a quote from Abdul Baha, the son of the prophet of the Baha'i faith. So Alex or Andre, maybe you can bring up the quote. It's number 3. The honor and distinction of the individual consists in this, that he among all the world's multitudes should become a source of social good. Is any larger bounty conceivable than this, that an individual looking within himself should find that by the confirming grace of God, he has become the cause of peace and well-being, of happiness and advantage to his fellow men. No, by the one true God, there is no greater bliss, no more complete delight. Knowing you, I know that you live your life to be a cause of peace and well-being for people. I know that about you. I think that at the same time, there are people out there who just have, maybe they will be thinking that you're a billionaire, and as a billionaire, you are maybe a product of a capitalist society that is not built right. Otherwise, maybe it would not have produced billionaires. How do you respond to that? So I guess, how do you see your responsibility? What's your response to them? And how do you see your responsibility as somebody who has this great wealth towards humanity?
I agree with them. The system's broken. I shouldn't be a billionaire. There shouldn't be billionaires. It's too much of a disparity between wealth. What the Baha'i faith says is the extremes of wealth and poverty should be done away with. However, I live in this society, and I wasn't a Baha'i when I created my wealth. I might have still created my wealth because I'm in this society. And so I think you have to judge a person by what they do with their money, whether they have $1 or $1 billion. I'm just trying to do good with it. My wife, really, she has dedicated her life towards philanthropy, which is wonderful, works very hard at it. I think that That's how we should judge people. I always tell people, don't judge people by what being a rich person does is it magnifies what you already. So if I had any good in me, it'll magnify the good. It'll probably magnify the bad. Only God can judge me. If you want to know about all my faults, you could talk to my wife. She would be a much longer conversation. But none of us is perfect. I do the best I can. I agree with the people that say there shouldn't be billionaires, but I don't think we should blame the billionaires per se. We should blame the system. And then we should ask the billionaires like me to be generous with their wealth and try to change the system. And so I am trying to change the system. Everything we do is for really the cause of the Baha'i faith, which is convincing the world that we're one human family. I heard Mr. Henderson, who I wish I could borrow his voice, Robert Henderson, because it's such a beautiful voice. But so anything he said sounds better, but I'll just do it in my voice. We are one human family. And, some of us are Black and some of us are white and women and men and different religions and different countries. And we have these illusory divisions. And so everything I do personally is to try to break down those divisions and make us realize, yes, we're diverse, and I'm not trying to change that at all. The Baha'i faith isn't trying to change that, but we're trying to allow humanity, educate humanity to understand that the time for war is over, the time for conflict. We're supposed to love each other. Every holy messenger has told us this. And Baha'u'llah has come and said, Jesus said, I've come not with peace, but with a sword. And he didn't mean that he was not peaceful. What he meant, because he was perfect peace. Jesus was all perfection. So was Muhammad, so was Buddha. I'm not here to take anything away from any divine messenger. But it's just us. Humanity wasn't ready for peace. And that's what Jesus was saying. And what Baha'u'llah says is, no, you're ready now. We may not seem like we're ready. And if you look around the world and listen to people talk, it may not seem, but we are. And it's time for all of us to step up and realize, and I think this is the biggest thing that Baha'is can do, is just convince people that we can do it. We can have world peace. And we're part of it. And so each of us needs to start working towards that goal.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that given the size of the problems that humanity is dealing with today and maybe dealing with in the future, unless that kind of a global collaboration, that kind of a process and framework exists, it'll be just fundamentally difficult, if not impossible, to address some of these really challenging issues. And by the way, talking about wealth, just for the viewers who may not be familiar, the Baha'i faith does not discourage people working hard and financially doing very well. The question is how that wealth is earned and how it's spent. It is discouraged to be wealthy through inheritance, and it is discouraged to hoard cash and not use it for the betterment of the world.
So the other thing about the Baha'i faith that it does, which is interesting, is it doesn't really favor the wealthy. So you can be as wealthy as you want, but the Baha'i faith doesn't say to you, you're better. I'm not one iota better than any other Baha'i. And I just recently had an instance where I asked for a favor and I didn't get it from, and so it was great. And I was mad, it hurt because I didn't get what I wanted. But then I thought about it. I said, yeah, that's great. Because, I was treated just like anyone else. And that's actually wonderful.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. So why did you, I have only two more questions given how late it is. Why did you make the movie, The Gate?
So when I was a Baha'i for 3 days, my friend Farshid Fidausi, who's in the payroll business like me, I emailed him very excited and I said, Farshid, I'm a Baha'i now. And I sent him a picture of me declaring, and actually it turns out I declared in front of this picture of 100 martyrs, one of whom was Farshid's father. And I didn't realize till months later that they all had numbers. And Farshid's father's number was 49, which was my age at the time. So it's very interesting. But Farshid, I said, Farshid, I'm just going to retire. I'm going to teach the faith. He says, well, you could do that and reach maybe hundreds of people, maybe thousands if you're really loud. But if you make a movie, you could reach millions of people. Less than an hour later, I get an email from a man by the name of Peter Samuelson, who's a movie producer, has become a good friend. And Peter has made over 25 movies now. His most famous, young people won't know it, it's called Revenge of the Nerds, but old people like me know that movie.
I know it.
And so Peter was actually emailing me. I'd never talked to him before. He was emailing me about philanthropy, about helping foster children, which we ended up doing. And I said to him at the end of the conversation, hey, my friend told me to make a movie. And so I ended up a week later, I was in LA where Peter lives, and I ended up talking to him, and we're sitting at an outdoor cafe, and there's a couple people next to us, and they asked a question about Christianity, and me as a Baha'i, I jumped in and answered it. Next thing you know, we're having a four-way conversation. It turns out the gentleman right next to Peter had been asked to make a movie about the Baha'is as well, which was incredible because there's not that many Baha'is or Baha'i movies. And so I thought, well, this is just too many signs. So I went on this beautiful 3-year odyssey. I was able to meet some incredible people and scholars like Nader Saidi and Mujan Momin, and I mean, you name it. I don't want everyone that I met, and of course my eventual business partner Justin and Rain Wilson. What amazed me was the graciousness. I was a new Baha'i, and the graciousness and kindness and patience of all the wonderful, very experienced and some of well-known Baha'is. That was really worth, to me, it was a wonderful experience to make the movie. And if it's not a great movie for anyone who's seen it, we did the best we could. It's called The Gate, Dawn of the Baha'i Faith. It's the best I could do, having been a Baha'i for 3 days and never having made a movie. We did the
well,
best.
I've seen it 6 times, and I love it. And thank you for having done that. So my last question, you've answered this in many different ways, but just maybe one more time. So why are you a Baha'i?
I'm a Baha'i because we live in 2020. We all live in 2020. God has sent messengers throughout the course of time. And it's the realization that God has sent a messenger for this age, and I've recognized that messenger. And so that was really the day it was October 2013. I remember it very well. That was kind of the day I really became a Baha'i. It's like, wait, he really is the messenger for this age, so I have to follow him. It wasn't until after I went to the garden several months later that I, in my heart, I really understood it fully. When I went to the garden, I saw that this was a new age. I saw that everything in this new age is Baha'u'llah, and I've never ever changed my mind that everything is reflected. All these beautiful ideas that everyone thinks are maybe ubiquitous ideas, secular ideas, like, for example, women's rights or civil rights or the idea of interfaith. These are all coming from Baha'u'llah. They didn't exist. The word interfaith didn't exist back when he passed away in 1892. The first interfaith conference was the next year, the Parliament of the World Religions. The first country to give women the vote was also the next year in 1893, New Zealand. And so this grand new age with all these brilliant ideas, they're all coming from him. And his incredible writing, 60 Christian Bibles worth. And so I know that the only hope for humanity in terms of world peace, because I ask people this all the time, I say, well, do you want world peace? And usually people say yes. And I say, well, okay, great. How do we get there? And Baha'is will give you a very long, detailed answer. You're going to need a couple days to get the answer. Most people, followers of every religion are wonderful. I have wonderful friends of all faiths who were Muslim, who were Christian, who were Jewish, friends and family. They're wonderful people of all faiths. But in order for the world collectively to really have world peace, which to me is the most important thing, we need to spread these teachings.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I would love to have another conversation with you at some point to talk about Baha'i faith and baseball. I think you know what I'm talking about, but that's a long conversation.
I can do. You want me to do the short version?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, so Baha'u'llah is a Cubs fan. Now, first of all, we have to establish that he's a baseball fan. So the holiest number in the Baha'i faith is the number 9. And so baseball has 9 innings, 9 batters, 9 fielders. So we got 9s all over baseball. So we know Baha'u'llah likes baseball, but then why the Cubs? You see, the last time the Cubs won the World Series before their most recent victory was 1908. Now that's, if you add the 1, 9, and 8, that's 18. That's a factor of 9. But the reason 1908 was so special to Baha'u'llah is 3 things happened in 1908. Number 1, the first temple, which was in Turkmenistan, was completed in 1908. That was very big. And number 2, the cornerstone for the second temple was actually delivered, which is actually a big thing for Baha'is, in 1908. And the number 3 thing, which is really important because he loved his son Abdul Baha so much, Abdul Baha was freed after 55 years in prison in 1908. So Baha'u'llah celebrated, and he let the Cubs win the World Series. Now, then you have to ask, why does he wait so long? So he waits all the way. He waits how many years?
I'm not a baseball fan. I have no idea.
So he waits till 2016. Now, if you add the 2, 1, and 6, what do you get? You get till 9. And in 2016, the Cubs win the World Series. Now, that's also a factor of 9. But you could have done. He didn't have to wait 108 years. He could have waited 9 years or 18 years. The math would work. He waits 108 years for a reason. You see, because he's waiting for his 9th temple to be built, in final Continental Temple in Chile, and that was finished in October of 2016. And not only that, but there's some other things that he gives us a couple hints. You see, he waits until his birthday for the Cubs to win. You see, the Cubs win shortly before midnight. They score the 9th run. They scored 9 runs. And they scored it on his birthday because his birthday was celebrated on November 12th. But that year, especially, they moved it to November 2nd. And so shortly before midnight Chicago time on November 2nd, the Cubs scored the winning run. And the MVP was Mr. Zobrist, Ben Zobrist, who was number 44. And the guy who scored the winning run, my favorite player, Anthony Rizzo, number 18. He caught the winning out and scored the 9th and final run that won it. And you see, if you put their 2 numbers together, 18 and 44, you get 1844, which is the year the Baha'i faith started.
You gotta love numbers to be able to take all these up and add them up. That's amazing. Thank you, Steve. And I love you very much, as so many of us do. Thank you so much. You're one of the kindest people ever. You're a great friend. I really appreciate everything that you do. Thank you.
Love you more, and happy Rizwan, and thank you so much for having me.
Of course, of course. So now we have one more song by Lacan. So I was just reminded at my mistake. We had 2 songs and Lacan is actually done. And now we're going to wrap this up by playing a pre-recorded song, a pre-recorded talk by an entrepreneur, a fashion designer, Melody Hassani. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. It was wonderful to have this program. Thank you all to all the panelists, to Steve, to Jenna, to Lacan, and to everybody who worked in the back end to make this all happen. Andre, Alex, Liz, Shadi, you guys did a phenomenal job. Thank you so much. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
When I was in college, I knew for sure that I wanted to go to law school. In fact, I was determined because it was obviously my passion. Growing up, all I wanted to do was become a voice to the voiceless. I wanted to fight for women's rights and human rights and civil rights, and things like racism enraged me. And I knew that I needed to dedicate the rest of my life to fighting for those causes. At the suggestion of my Uncle Fred, while I was in college, he said, you should try doing a couple internships to see what the practice of law is versus the study of it. And I was like, that's a great idea. I'm going to do that. So I set on this mission over the next 4 years of my undergraduate to do every single internship under the sun. I interned at the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights on Capitol Hill, I did an internship at the White House. I worked at private firms. I worked at Baha'i-based firms. I talked to every single person that I admired and loved. And at the end of it, I was left completely disenchanted because I couldn't see how I could wake up every day for the rest of my life and do that. So I became severely depressed because I felt like I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was depressed because, more importantly, I didn't know myself well enough to make the decision of what I wanted to do. And I had just gone through this whole thing of spending all my mom's hard-earned money on LSAT applications, LSAT courses and law school applications. And everybody had this idea of me as like, this is what Melody's gonna be, and I felt like I was failing them, which is probably really selfish in hindsight, but that's what it felt like. So when I was depressed, a friend of mine recommended that I speak to this woman. And she was like, this woman is really good at mirroring people, so you should have a talk with her. And I was like, sure, I'll do anything. So I spoke to this woman, and in the hour that I spoke to her, she mirrored me back in such a way that I had never been mirrored before. And I felt for the first time in my life at the age of 24 that somebody had finally seen me. And so there was a part of this that was incredible, but then there was also a part of it that was the most terrifying thing on the planet, because somebody had said out loud all the things that I thought I was, but that nobody had ever confirmed. So she brought up this quote actually by Baha'u'llah that says, regard man as a mine rich in gems of inestimable value. I knew that I had a gift in design, and I knew that I had this gift my entire life. But like many other kids, we would hope that our parents and our teachers up to a certain age mirror us and let us know like, hey, you're really good at this, you're gonna be something. Or you would think that they would, mirror these things back to you, but unfortunately that doesn't always happen because our parents are used to doing this thing that makes you want to be safe, right? So they just want the best for you. It's really out of the best intentions ever, but they want what's best for you. So I read this quote, regard man as a mine rich in gems of inestimable value, and I was like, oh, we all have these gems of inestimable value, but it is our responsibility to mine those gems. And so I set out on this mission of wanting to mine my own gems. And as I was doing this, I realized that I was going up history. I was going up against history. And I had to go up against every single generation of women in my entire family that hadn't had the opportunity to do what they wanted to do. And so I had all these voices that were coming at me that were like, you can't do that. It's not safe. Don't go there. A woman isn't supposed to do that. And as I searched deeper, I realized that there was even more hidden language. Like, one thing that was most shocking to me is that my value lied in who I married. So the general thing that I'd keep getting back to me is that it's more valuable for you to be Mrs. Doctor, blah, 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 than for me to become my own doctor. So once I realized this, I started to question everything. I really felt like for the first time in my life, I had become a student of life. And I even started to question God because I was like, really, why would you do this to me? So I realized that the idea I had of God was very much my mom's, because our mom is our first creator, right? We live in them, we come out of them, and generally they're the first ones that we identify as the creator. So I became like one of these students like in the Kung Fu films that are like on Shaolin Mountain, like, going crazy every day. And I decided that I was going to present 3 questions to God and that I would demand answers. And if God existed, that he would answer my questions. So every single morning and every night, I would wake up and I would plead with God. And I'd say, show me what you look like to me. To me. I want to know who you are to me. Connect me to you as you are, not as what I think you are. and show me my path, because I don't know. Show me. So at the end of this, I did receive many answers, and my life changed greatly, because for the first time in my life, even though my entire life I had prayed and I thought I was spiritual and I had a connection, I felt like for the first time I really got to know God. And like I said, I learned many things, but the one thing that I learned more so than anything is that God is the ultimate resource. The ultimate resource. And I know everybody's like, has this like hippie dip thing of like, God is good all the time. God is everything. But to me, it was like, no, God is going to be my business partner. He's going to be my father. He's going to be my mother. God is truly the ultimate resource. So I knew that if I maintained that relationship above anything else, that every day I would wake up and I'd remember who I am and exactly why I'm here. So around that time too, it just so happened that there was a lot of these like new age practices and things coming out, and The Secret had come out around that time. And I don't know how many of you saw the movie or read the book, but it was this huge phenomenon among my friends. And the one thing that I realized that The Secret lacked was the will of God. So of course, the laws of attraction are true, and we all believe in them, and they do exist in the world. But what if I want a huge house, and I make a vision board, and I'm like, I attract it, and I get this huge house, but what if that house takes me out of my purpose? What if that house now is a burden because I'm working overtime just to maintain this house? So you see, it's really, really important to have that connection first, because we don't know what's good for us. We know what we think is good for us, but we need to have that connection in order to, live a truly authentic life. And, at the time I spoke to my aunt who lives in Uganda, and she was like, Melody, if you came here and you told people that there's a pill that you take that makes you happy, she's like, people would laugh at you. And I was like, Amifuru, what do you guys do? What do you mean? And she was like, if somebody here is sad, everybody in the village gets together and sings until they're happy again. And then she's like, what do you think people in a country like this do that have no resources? She's like, we don't have water or electricity on a constant basis. She's like, what do you think we do? Think about that when there are no resources. She said 4 elders from the tribe go out into the field when there's a drought, and they pray to the ancestors for rain, and it rains. The ancestors, God, Jah, Allah, Jehovah, I don't care what you want to call it. But they know that they have this access. So in America, I feel like we've really forgotten about this connection. The most great connection that we have to this, the greatest resource that could ever present itself to us. And instead, we look for everything outside of ourselves. We're the largest consumers of pills, so many pills, marijuana. I mean, there's weed, everything now. And all we do is this topical numbing things that just take us out of who we are versus going in. At the same time, around that time, I read this quote by Abdu'l-Baha. And he said, it is an axiomatic fact that while you meditate, you are speaking with your own spirit. In that state of mind, you put certain questions to your spirit, and the spirit answers. The light breaks forth and reality is revealed. In that same quote, he also goes on to say that through it, inventions are possible, and things that man knew nothing about are presented to him. And I was blown away by this quote, because I was like, what do you mean I put questions to my own spirit and it answers? Like the light breaks forth. I was like, what does that mean? And why would the prophet of God say this if it wasn't true? So with the help of Kathy Grammer, who was one of my greatest mentors, she taught me how to meditate. And I started off doing guided meditation. And through the process of guided meditation, I did exactly this. I presented questions to my spirit, and my spirit would answer in the form of wake dreams. So I started off really simple. I would ask about attributes that I was interested in. So for example, I'd ask about purity. I'd be like, show me what purity looks like. And I would come out of meditation and I'd be like, whoa, I had no idea. And it was really as if I was putting questions to something that was higher than me, and that higher, clear thing was answering. Once I learned that I had access to myself in this way, then I finally developed the confidence and assurance that I needed to go up against any type of inertia that presented itself to me, including my history, including all the myths that people told me that I knew weren't true, like you have to pay your dues. Who made that up? What if I'm just it? Why do I have to pay my dues? So I literally started to question everything. And around this time, it was also when I started to become fascinated with nature, because I realized that nature is really a true mirror of our existence here. So I was like, what if everybody in the world was as authentic as nature? So like animals, the only difference between us and animals is that we have free will and the ability to reason, right? So a squirrel isn't trying to be at the beach because a squirrel knows that it belongs in a tree and with a walnut, and that's where it's happiest. If it were at the beach, it would be miserable. But I feel like we have so many squirrels at the beach in our world because people aren't asking themselves the true questions of like, who am I? What makes me happiest? Where do I belong? And they're not asking them authentically. They're saying, what's my role? What's my role? But they're not going in to figure it out. So Julie Burns Walker says this quote of, love is the only nutrient in the world that can be expressed. Think about that for a second. Love is the only nutrient. So I can express a nutrient to you. So this is something that I try to practice its expression in the best way possible. And I want to say, as so many have echoed before me, that love isn't this like hippy dip esoteric thing that just is out here, that exists between men and women, or it's not something that's so small. Love is the most powerful thing in the world. And love is the only way that you can gain memory of who you are. It's only through doing things that you love that you can remember who you are. So if you love running, you need to make time to run every day, because I promise you, if you strap on your shoes and go take that run, that you're going to have a conversation with somebody, or there's going to be a thought that comes over you, or there's going to be some special sign there that's just for you, that reminds you of who you are. And just in the same way, forgetfulness is equally as much of a practice. I mean, I'm a total victim of Instagram, and I get into these black holes on Instagram sometimes where I'll end up on like Kim Kardashian's page or something. And after 30 minutes of scrolling on her page, I'm like, do I need a waist trainer? Like, maybe I need that teeth whitening thing and it's nothing against her. I think she's a beautiful, incredible person. But I know that there's nothing there for me. There's no memory there for me of who I am. There's nothing there that makes me remember or that inspires me of who I am. It makes me forget. So I have to go in the way of things that I love. Instead, I'll go on Hermes's website and watch how they make, how cobblers make leather gloves by hand. And after that, I'm like, ooh. Or I watch videos of Prince performing where the man is so inhabited in himself that even with eyeliner and a perm and heels, I'm like, damn, he's hot. Because he has completely inhabited himself. And that's the direction in which I need to go, because that makes me remember. And every single day on this planet, we are faced with forgetfulness. Every single day we forget who we are. So the responsibility to remember is the most important. So there's this, one of the other things that really causes me to remember who I am is Lauryn Hill's Unplugged album. It's probably my most played album of all time, and she drops many gems in there, but I'll leave you with this. There's all this social doctrine that says that the infinite God, with all his expression, who created every single one of us absolutely different, wants everyone to fit into the same suit. That's deception. And I put the fingerprint there because there's 5 billion of us on this planet, and each one of us has a different fingerprint. Isn't that testament to God's design, that we were each created completely and beautifully different? And it is our absolute responsibility to figure out who we are and why we're here. And each one of us contains a special remedy to all the world's ills if we should choose to step up to that. Thank you.